In today's University of Arizona's Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we're bringing you another conversation with DL instructional designers. The way we talk about online education has become increasingly sophisticated as more instructors step into the growing realm of digital learning. So, educators and instructional designers need to work together to create the most effective approach in the online modality. Concepts can be blurry, such as the difference between outcomes and learning objectives. So in today's conversation, we explore ways to help instructors and instructional designers create clear and well-structured courses for the online modality. Stay with us.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 3 of the Digital Learning Download podcast, Futures in Digital Learning. I am Adam Davi, Senior Instructional Designer for Digital Learning, and my co-host is here as well.
And I'm Brian Hale, an Instructional Designer over at Digital Learning.
And we have an exciting conversation today with 4 instructional designers from our department here to talk about learning outcomes and alignment. I know, calm down.
Hi, I'm Laura Schmidt. I'm a senior instructional designer and I work predominantly with global microcampus courses.
I'm Tiffany McClelland. I am an instructional designer and also a quality matters coordinator, and I work primarily right now with social and behavioral sciences.
I'm Reese Davis. I work primarily with the College of Law and global microcampus courses.
Hey, I'm Nicole Schmidt, and I coordinate the Quality Matters program across campus, so I am all over the place. Sorry, I can't do any better than that.
Laura Smith, Nicole Schmidt, Reese Davis, and Tiffany McClelland all here to talk to us today about this exciting topic. So welcome all of you to our podcast. We are excited to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam.
Awesome. Let's get to the first question. So first of all, we need to clarify some terms before we get into this discussion and this conversation. So what is the difference between outcomes, objectives, and goals? And I know, Nicole, you are one of the experts in our office about this, so I'm going to let you lead this off.
Expert is such a strong word. I'm still learning, but yes, I do work with outcomes every day and think about alignment almost every day. And the difference between outcomes and objectives is a little bit frustrating because the terms are used differently throughout the field of education. Sometimes they are used interchangeably, and sometimes the meanings are switched from one to the other, back and forth. So I'm going to sort of break down a little bit about how they're used here at the University of Arizona and how we use them here at the Office of Digital Learning. So objectives, basically, you have one that's teacher-centered and one that is student-centered, okay? So objectives at the University of Arizona are considered the teacher-centered description of the achievement of a learning goal, right? So an objective is typically constructed in a longer form than an outcome. It may be measurable, it may not be measurable, but it basically outlines the teacher's intention of what they will cover and how that content or that instruction will lead to a specific kind of learning. Outcomes, on the other hand, have to be specific and measurable, and they're usually more succinct than objectives. And we, for the purposes of Quality Matters, ask all instructors that we work with to use measurable verbs from the Bloom's taxonomy, and they should be discrete items that are used in assessment, right? So an outcome is basically an action that students will perform to show that they have achieved the learning goal, and it should be measurable. That's why we ask it to be specific and discrete.
Excellent, thank you. That's a great breakdown of those, and I want to open it up to the others on this podcast as well to talk. What are the sticking points with talking about outcomes versus objectives with faculty? Like, is there confusion on campus? Is this a challenge that you deal with, and how do you kind of mitigate that challenge? And I'll let whoever wants to jump in and start with this.
Oh, nobody wants to jump in. That's frightening.
That's
okay.
Someone else a chance. I think sometimes instructors have issues with sort of the backwards approach to course design because they feel like it limits their autonomy to be creative and to be flexible throughout the course. So that is one issue that I run into a lot. And it is really kind of a tightrope walking to consider the, balancing between like making sure that a certain level of quality is achieved, that the course is understood, that the learning expectations are understood, and that the teachers have the flexibility that they need.
I think though, in terms of definitions, once instructors understand the difference, I think most of them are on board and supportive of differentiating them and using them how we in our office would like to. So to kind of talk about the positive end of that.
That's good.
Yeah, sure. There's also a lot of research showing that students really appreciate a well-structured course and really understanding what their teachers expect them to be able to do.
That's excellent. I think that's probably an undervalued piece of that is the student piece and what they need as far as the outcomes and objectives. When you do work with faculty, once you get past this first stage, where do you start with the outcome drafting process? What is the first step? How do you approach this subject with faculty? Reese, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So when I start with faculty, the first question that I ask is really just, what do you want students to learn in this course? That's usually a good opener, and we can approach the conversation later about specific and measurable and all those wonderful things that we need. But yeah, just to get started, that's my first question. And then it's a lot of ebb and flow. We talk about what students need to learn, and then we talk about how we're going to measure that, and then have we accounted for those things. And so yeah, it's a lot of back and forth. It's conversation. It's not just provide the outcomes and that's the end of it.
I really love that, Reese, because you're talking about like setting the learning goals first, which are they can be way broader and more conceptual than the outcomes and the objectives.
Yeah, and I like that it's student focused, kind of what we've been talking a little bit already of, what do those students need to know? What sort of questions would they have about this content or course? Yeah, where are they going? And what do they need to get there?
I like to think of it as an inverted pyramid when I start with that way too. It's you start big and then you kind of narrow it down and make it smaller and more specific. Exactly. So
yeah, and it kind of comes from experiences where when I've just asked instructors to draft those outcomes, and you get just tons and tons of understand, these very broad things. And I thought, well, maybe we need to start with that. But instead of them thinking, well, I did the outcomes, to just start with, tell me what they need to understand. And then we have something to build on.
If you want to make a room full of IDs cringe, start your learning outcomes with understand.
I was just going to say that. That's like step one in creating a good outcome is understanding which verbs are measurable and not. And the idea is that, if with an outcome, you have to be able to measure it. I'll probably repeat that way too many times throughout this podcast, but understanding is really difficult to measure. Maybe some cognitive scientists can like presume to do it or something like that. But it's generally things like, what are some other ones? Understand or appreciate or
learn.
Yeah, those are the big, like for an instructional designer, like the big flashing red lights come on when we hear those verbs in an outcome.
Yeah, so it's helpful to bring in those Bloom taxonomy charts and have some ideas of verbs to spark that and help them branch out from those.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really amazing how many verbs I have in the past used a 2-sheeter that's just full of measurable verbs. It's amazing how many verbs there are. And it's also equally amazing how many instructors just rely on the learn about whatever.
I guess that's good. Every teacher wants their students to learn, right?
Yeah.
And kind of backing up to the measurable part, I'm working with having instructors actually write outcomes for if they have multimedia assignments, which is kind of it's an approach that I've been thinking a lot about. what are we asking students to learn from doing a project like that? And it has to do with a lot of creative and digital literacies, skills that they're developing that can be a little bit difficult to measure if you don't spend some time with it. But that alignment is part of it, thinking about how do we make it measurable? And when you identify it, then thinking about what artifacts do you need to collect as part of that process. So it ties in really well with how we think about outcomes, of really verbalizing what it is that you're having students learn from the content, and then how do we know that they learned it?
I think it's really important from the student perspective. Why is the instructor asking me to do something in this particular way? Why do I have to learn this software? Why do I have to learn the format? And when you can point back to an outcome or an objective or an end goal that says, so that you will be able to whatever, it just ties it all together so nicely. And I think it helps the student understand just a little bit better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We know that a lot of instructors assign it because they think it's a fun approach to doing an assignment, things like that. But some of the feedback from students is like, well, I put a lot of work into this and it doesn't really seem to matter in my grades. So why did I invest that time in it? But when if you ask the instructor why, the instructor usually has a reason for that. But that's not always considered and articulated to students. So it is really helpful.
And that's why the outcomes are definitely student-centered, because it's the teacher's way of telling the students directly what they want them to do and giving them the why that they need to really feel like what they're doing is meaningful.
Yeah, for sure.
That's I think an important buzzword there is meaningful, right? Is how do we make the learning meaningful for students, and how do we make it impactful, right? So that they want to participate, they want to engage in the course. And a lot of that comes back to those outcomes. And then also, seeing that those outcomes align with the rest of the activities in the assessment, right? And I think that's sometimes the tricky part is we can have, a great outcome and then not measure it with the proper activity, right? Or vice versa, have a great activity and then your outcome doesn't match with what the activity is actually accomplishing. So thinking about that with, course design, how do you approach that? Like what's, we look at the outcomes first and then look at the activities, and then is there a back and forth? What are some recommendations or what are some approaches that you all take with instructors with making sure that all of those things align? Tiffany, any thoughts on that with your work? Because you see a lot of courses after maybe kind of they've run one or two times too, and need some of that revision as well.
I do, and that alignment piece it's something that is becoming more prevalent. People want to show how their materials, how their assignments, how they're interwoven, because there may be pieces to your course that your students they can't see how everything is interconnected. And if they're going to invest the time, if they're going to invest their work, demonstrating this to your students it's incredibly valuable to both you and to them. One of the really brilliant ways I've seen in different courses, and it's super simple, it's creating a chart. And instructors can show, hey, you're going to do this assignment and it's connected to this outcome, and you're going to be reading this and watching this video or engaging with this play posit. And they can see all three pieces and they can see that interconnectedness between the different pieces. And as a student and as an instructional designer, having all of those together, it makes the assignment make more sense. And it creates that meaningful expression of the work that the students are doing.
That's great. Thank you for that. And it's nice to know that too. I think, something as simple as a chart to kind of visually show that for students is maybe not all you need, but the great starting point, right? That you can show that and express that for your course. All right. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you face with in this work, in constructing outcomes and aligning those outcomes to activities, what are some of those speed bumps? What are some of those challenges, those hangups that you get with meeting with faculty? Or are there any? Am I making up the fact that there are challenges?
I think we touched a little bit on some of them, but in calibrating those outcomes, making sure that we have those accurate verbs that are measuring what they want the students to do, and also simplifying them. Sometimes they have these great ideas and goals that they want students to do, and an outcome can be too complex, or it can be too simple. So I think also trying to find that balance that is narrow enough and focuses what you want them to do, but is going to lead students in the right direction. So that's kind of one speed bump I've seen, is just trying to work through, massage those learning outcomes per se.
As a quality matters reviewer, when I'm reviewing a course, I'm kind of looking at it as a backwards outline. Like I'm looking at the finished product and then deconstructing it. And one of the things that, the first things that I do, and one of the first stumbling blocks, I think, are making sure that the course level outcomes are aligned with the module level outcomes. So outcomes are a little bit shorter than objectives naturally, because they're often scaffolded within each, or nested within each other. Outcomes can be written at the course level. What will the student be able to do after they complete this course, at the module level, at the activity level, or the lesson level? And so part of what I'm looking at is, okay, if I have all of these outcomes in module 1, for example, which course level outcomes do they align with? And is there a general sense of an architecture to the course? Is it building? Can I see how it's building towards these course level outcomes or not?
That whole idea of scaffolding your module level outcomes. So like she said, that you build up to that course level outcome, and reiterating that to faculty that it's really a building block process. And if you view it that way, then oftentimes it makes it a little bit easier if these are the steps to get to the top level.
And helping them understand that takes a little bit of time, because I think that's the other thing with timeline is we want a course done, we want it done quickly, but helping them see that if they invest this time up front to create these building blocks and build this foundation, that things will go a lot smoother as we build and as they launch.
And be more meaningful.
There it is.
I also think another stumbling block is sometimes when there are outcomes that are written at the institutional level. And this usually happens for the course level outcomes rather than the module level outcomes. But if a teacher is working in a program and the director or the head of the program creates the learning outcomes for the course, and if they don't satisfy QM expectations, quality matters expectations, and the instructor can't change them, that's a little bit of a stumbling block.
Yeah, that's actually one I'm dealing with right now in a course. So that's yeah. So I feel that, yes, it is. So one of the questions I get often from instructors as they're constructing these outcomes is they ask, well, how many do I need? How many do I need for the course? How many do I need for each module? And I never know how to answer that, because I feel like just throwing out a number is not really being fair to this process, looking at all of it, but and that scaffolding and that nesting that you talked about, Nicole, and what that looks like. And so I think, it's important to go back to what Reese said earlier, is what do you want the students to learn? What do you want them to get out of this? And that will kind of help dictate moving forward, how many outcomes you actually end up with. And what that looks like. And like Laura said, it's that process. You have that starting point, and I always like to tell instructors that this is not a like one and done type situation where you write your outcomes and you move on to the next thing, where these are kind of living, breathing entities that can be changed and edited and adapted as the course design process goes through. And so I think it's important to understand that. and know, unless of course you're stuck with outcomes that your department or whatnot, right? You can't change them, but helping faculty and helping instructors know that this is, this is where we want to start, but this is not necessarily where we end with the outcome process, and to make sure that everything, lines up together and fits well by the time the course launches, is the most important part.
I think that is one of the tricky parts is, making sure the instructor understands that it is totally okay to revise those outcomes as we go.
Yeah.
They're not carved in any stone anywhere.
I was just going to say, when you're trying to determine how many outcomes to include, when you have the authority to decide what outcomes to include, I liked how Adam and Reese are both saying to just go back and think about your student's perspective and view the course from your student's eyes, and remember that the outcomes are really your way of communicating to the students what they should be able to do. So you wouldn't want them to feel too overwhelmed. But you also wouldn't want it to be too vague. You would want them to feel like they're in a safe learning environment where the expectations are clear. Yeah,
and along the lines of numerical, I also have a hard time giving a number, but I also try to encourage making sure there aren't too many, that we aren't getting confused with here's the list of assignments and here's our learning outcomes, but making it manageable.
As an instructor, if I'm working late at night, or the instructional designer I'm working with is really, really busy, where can I go as an instructor to find a list of great objectives, outcomes, goals? Do we have a resource like that that's U of A approved or DL approved?
I have a page attached to the course map that I share with instructors that talks about constructing outcomes. I know that the assessment office on campus does kind of workshops on that and has some materials on that.
Access course that some of people like Emily and some people in our office have developed. It has a whole module on outcomes, right?
Yes, I worked on that team. we created online course design guide in campus that is open enrollment to anyone and has a module about backwards design and learning outcomes. And it links to a couple of websites that are outcome builders. So it will guide you through the process. You can insert what you want to do, and it will help you create outcomes and objectives. So it's another resource.
That's awesome.
Not necessarily
Also,
ours, but someone else.
And if you have the ability to engage with our course creator workshop that is run by fellow ID Kathy Russell, one of the first assignments that the instructors engage in is they are building outcomes. And I was actually just looking at this document, and she has pages of information on that. So if you're interested in that and having some more in-depth work done, check out the digital learning website.
What's the address for the digital learning website?
digitallearning.arizona.edu.
Yes. I feel like we've kind of talked about this a little bit already, but like what advice would you give for constructing outcomes, showing alignment? And I know we brought up kind of thinking about what the students learn, what, when showing alignment, using a chart in there. What other pieces of advice do we have for our audience out there to think about when broaching this topic?
I would say just make sure you start with the end in mind, really, because this is this is the first step in a backwards design. So don't necessarily think, oh, I'm going to have them do this for the final project and then write your outcomes. I just, as Reese said at the beginning of the conversation, start with your learning goals, the really broad notion of what you want the students to accomplish, and the outcomes, and then get creative. And maybe Reese has some advice on creative ways to connect outcomes with different instructional technologies and things like that. But that's what I would say.
That's good. And I like that you brought up the idea of educational technologies, right? Because a lot of times, and you all might, have similar different experiences, but we have faculty instructors that come to us and say, oh, I really want to use this tool. How can I use this tool? And it's like, well, is it the best? Like, let's look at the outcomes first, right? And see, is this the best tool to use for what you want your students to accomplish and to achieve? So I think that's important to, that the tool kind of comes last in a lot of these instances. And sometimes what you think is the best tool to use might not be. And there might be something that is actually better for your purposes.
That's something that I see a lot in working with multimedia assignments is, the instructors who were choosing the technology first with really no idea of what it is they're using it for. When, if they want to include technology, that's awesome. I'm always happy to do that. But, let's start with the what, and then we'll figure out how to do it.
And sometimes it might be an assignment, there might be an outcome that you want the students to reach where there could be multiple technologies or multiple ways for students to get there, right? And encouraging that student choice and encouraging that option and maybe some of that multimodality for students to accomplish that outcome is a good thing to have. And, not only is it nice for students to be able to kind of showcase their work in different ways, but also I would think as an instructor, it might be nice to kind of have a little bit of differentiation. So you're not grading the same thing 150 times, but maybe that's just me. I like variety.
Yeah, as long as the rubric allows for the variety.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So and that has to be built in, obviously, but I think it's nice to know that that can be an option.
I was going to say just one more thing. When you have those clear outcomes developed and written, then really it all comes kind of back to the verb, the main verb. So if you're saying, analyze this whatever topic that you're working on, then you're really focusing on analysis in whatever assessment activity that you're using. So certain activities lend themselves towards analysis, whereas others don't. And certain technologies allow that kind of analysis activity, and others do not. So it's kind of fun because once you have your outcomes written, you can really be creative about what kind of tools you use to help students meet those outcomes. But then you really have to focus on, well, what is the verb? What is the cognitive action or ability that I'm asking the students to achieve with this? I'm trying to think of I don't know if anyone else can think of a good example of like a mismatched outcome and technology.
Well, I think it's, when you use a term like analyze and then they give a multiple choice quiz.
I was just going to say
right.
that.
Yeah, that's a good go-to for sure.
Yeah.
Whereas with a tool like VoiceThread, they can comment in a variety of modalities and they can analyze something that's on their screen. So there you go. That's a good example.
Thank you for kind of breaking that down and showing that example too of how things can easily get mismatched, where we think that this quiz is asking students to analyze something, but really it's not. And so it's real easy to make that mistake, and all it takes is either changing that assessment, right, or altering that outcome, revising that outcome to better reflect what the assessment is actually asking of the students. And sometimes it's as simple as changing a verb to make sure that it fits. And I think that's not always understood by instructors too. They think it might be a lot more work on their end, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I think Nicole's example really shows how having a solid verb in that outcome actually helps, because like analyze, you have options there, but you know what the students are learning, what they should demonstrate, and then you're choosing, does that look like a presentation? Does that look like a paper? It could be a few different things.
That's what I see when I'm completing courses I phrase a lot, the verbs themselves. And another sticky point is that the verbs themselves can be measurable. However, it can be unclear as to how the students are going to demonstrate that skill. And having talked to instructors are like, but it's measurable. I'm like, yeah, that's true. But what are they doing? And once we had that conversation, it's like, okay, let's move on. And, the beautiful thing about, going back to it again, that Bloom's taxonomy wheel, it gives you a wide variety of different verbs that you can use. And honestly, if you get stuck, Google synonyms for the verb that you want to use. Done it many times.
Yes.
I think another tricky thing is sometimes with rubrics or grading criteria, remembering the outcomes when you develop that rubric, because the rubric or the grading criteria is essentially the way that you prove that the student has achieved the outcome. So they have to be connected to each other,
You don't want your students doing all this work for only 5 points.
Or like if they write a paper and they're supposed to analyze something, but the rubric just says, well, the punctuation was good, there were no grammar mistakes, they used APA or whatever, but there's nothing really related to the competency or the learning that they're obviously doing in the activity,
If that wasn't achieved, I would love to see the TCEs for that course.
Yeah.
I just checked to see if there's a future topic about rubrics alone coming up. There's not, but I think we need to add that because I feel like rubrics can be a very robust topic that we could discuss and go on and on about. So that's we'll save that for another day. But
I'm just planting the seed right now.
There you go. Excellent. Well, I think this has been a wonderful conversation about outcomes and alignment. I want to thank all of you for participating and joining us in this month's episode of the Digital Learning Download podcast. Thank you, and come join us next month when we are going to be highlighting continuous improvement. So taking this conversation about outcomes and alignment and looking at how we can continually improve throughout the course process.
Learning never stops.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona Digital Learning. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website.